each other. The mail is censored. We know of bribery with local politicians. People undergo, as I did, a change in their value system and become confused about what is right and what is wrong.
Another danger that you can see in a lot of the Eastern thinking is the sort of syncretism and the failure to make distinctions so that you transcend not just right and wrong, but this and that. And I think it's very important to say there are distinctions, not just between right and wrong, between all sorts of things, to think critically, to think clearly.
The whole philosophy of Hinduism is very relative. There are no absolute moral standards upon which to act. Your feeling of right or wrong would change according to your level of consciousness.
You can become so completely under the power of this particular person that you refuse to think, or if you like, you're unable to think. You can lose the power to take decisions of any sort, no matter how trifling, in any area of your life.
Sally Belfridge, former resident of Rajneesh's religious community in India, wrote of her disillusionment in her book, Flowers of Emptiness.
I felt more and more kind of drawn into this emptiness of his. It's impossible to describe. It's more than charisma. Charisma doesn't do it justice at all. It's more than an aura. I really believed that he knew something I didn't, that he was on a plane that I was not.
They ask you for total and also brainless obedience and worship because they are God and they are more than human, and you have to follow these gods. You are not asked to deal with your brain and to ask questions.
I discover with amazement and dismay the readiness of people to submit.
So many people in the world feel that they've got to fling themselves headlong and believe and give up their autonomy.
People love to give up this heavy freedom that we have to carry with all the decisions and the effort it implies.
Freedom in the East is freedom from individuality. So it's a detached freedom that has no high place of man. And a lot of the Eastern way of thinking is like a sort of mist that folds in, or it's been described as an embrace that smothers any differences.
I found that I lost my identity somehow. He had no identity. He was a sort of conduit to the infinite. And I was somehow at the receiving end of something very strange and extraordinary.
It is part of the world of illusion, and the goal is to withdraw and detach yourself from it. So there's no high view of, say, social action or compassion or an outraged concern to see justice in this world. On the contrary, if you do things like that, very often you're just tinkering with a person's karma.
They believe that when a person suffers, that is what he's due as a result of the law of karma, because you've done something very sinful in this lifetime or in a past lifetime. So there's very little compassion.
One just was taught to ignore all of the dreadful, I mean, the intolerable poverty and suffering of India. There were beggars clustering around the gates of the ashram day and night, children starving, living in little huts surrounding what was supposed to be a religious community. The contradiction was disgusting to me, but most of the sannyasins failed to notice it. It appeared not to bother them in the least.
Life is suffering. Therefore, you cannot escape suffering without escaping life. Interfering with suffering, entering into suffering, is totally ununderstandable for a real Hindu.
I was a member of the Social Service League at the college, and we were trying to do what we could to help people in the villages. A gentleman who was head of the Department of Hindi came around to us and said, "Why are you doing this? These people who are suffering in the villages, sick or diseased or whatever, have come to us in this state because they have done something wrong in their past lives. Now, no matter what you do to them, if you cut short their suffering in this life, what will happen is they will simply come back in their next life in the same state or a worse state. So you're really wasting your time."
Suffering is there, and you can't do anything about it. But you can meditate yourself away from suffering.
We feel that the cause of suffering is within, and so to allow people to experience peace themselves, we teach courses in meditation.
They seek to escape suffering by numbing their emotions and compassion through meditation. Maharishi, TM's guru, once said that a hungry person can become a happy hungry person through practicing meditation.
Humanitarian activities are again by principle foreign to Hinduism. When they are found within Hinduism, it is a direct influence from the Christian missionary movement, a sort of imitation of Christian missionary activity.
Contrast, say, part of the Eastern view with the Christian view. One of the stories I've heard that meant a lot to many people is the story of the Zen poet Issa in the 17th century. He lost all 5 of his children and then his wife, whom he greatly loved, and each time one of them died, he went to the Zen master and said, "Now how can I take this?" And the master said, "Always remember the world is due, D-W. In other words, the sun rises, the dew disappears. Don't get hassled, don't involve yourself in mourning and grief." And he went home and wrote what became his most famous poem. And transliterated into English, it goes like this: "The world is due, and yet, and yet." In other words, the world is due, there's the logic of Buddhism. And yet, the humanness which is not satisfied or fulfilled because it wants more of an answer than that. Now, you compare that, say, with Jesus, who face to face with death was not detached or uninvolved. He was angry and he wept. Why? Because death is outrageous. God didn't make the world like this. Something's out of joint, something's wrong. And the Christian view sees evil and death as the wrong they are and therefore fights them. And that's what the East lacks.
In the Christian tradition, the suffering is taken so seriously that God himself had to enter it and take it upon himself. Without this taking upon himself the suffering of mankind, there is no Christianity. That's the heart of Christianity.
Although the Hindu tries to convince himself that suffering is only in his mind, an illusion as he calls it, Maya, at the same time he believes that he has to suffer again and again by forever being forced to return to this world through reincarnation. There is no escape from this endless wheel of samsara, life and death, because in Hinduism, unlike Christianity, there is no forgiveness, because there is no sin. Therefore, sadly, also, there is no hope.
All the gurus that I know of in the Western world teach reincarnation, a doctrine very central to Hinduism. Reincarnation is all about dying and coming back to this world in one form or the other.
Hare Krishna people believe in transmigration of the soul, as they prefer to call it, traveling from body to body to body.
These physical bodies don't last forever, even though the soul does. So in the same way that a driver needs to change cars, in the same way we need to change from one body to another.
Gandhi called reincarnation a burden too great to bear. Yet it is being eagerly embraced in the West in diluted form, as part of a patent blend of Hinduism and Zen Buddhism, camouflaged with psychological terminology. This New Age religion is promoted through thousands of worldwide networks and hundreds of major gatherings, such as this Mind, Body, Spirit Festival held in Los Angeles. It is a westernized version of India's Kumbh Mela and promotes many of the same gurus and practices, from astrology and palmistry to psychic readings, healings, and meditations. The festival, now international, was started in London in 1977 by Graham